Her cupboards were empty, the wind howled through the cracks of her lonely house, and Christmas felt like a cruel reminder of all she had lost, but a single knock at the door promised a night that could change everything. It immediately sets the scene, evokes emotion, and teases the transformative event without giving too much away. The story begins on a cold Christmas Eve in a small quiet house where the air feels heavy with silence and the shadows stretch long across the walls. The widow moves slowly from room to room carrying the weight of memories that seem to settle in every corner. She stops in the kitchen and opens the cupboards to see nearly nothing inside. The shelves are bare and the few ingredients left remind her of meals once shared with laughter and family. The thought of sitting down to a lonely dinner makes her chest ache and she feels emptiness pressing in around her. She walks to the window and looks out at the houses down the street, each one glowing with light and warmth. The smell of baked goods and roasted meats seems to drift through the cracks of her window and she inhales deeply, wishing she could be part of that life. She remembers Christmases from years before when the table was full and laughter bounced off the walls. She recalls the smell of pine and spices, the clatter of dishes and the sound voices calling across the room. The memories are vivid and cruel in their contrast to the quiet stillness that surrounds her now. She tries to keep busy wiping counters and arranging a few decorations, but the motion feels empty and hollow. She sets a small candle on the table and lights it, hoping the tiny flame will chase away some of the darkness in her heart. As evening falls, the widow wraps herself in a thick shawl and moves from room to room, checking windows and doors. The wind outside howls and rattles panes, adding to the sense of isolation. She feels the years of solitude in her bones weigh. Each step echoes in the empty rooms. She thinks about calling someone or visiting a neighbor, but pride and habit keep her from reaching out. The clock ticks slowly and the night stretches on, feeling longer and heavier with each passing minute. In the living room, she sits down on the worn sofa staring at the small Christmas tree she had managed to set up earlier. The lights twinkle weakly and she traces the ornaments with her eyes, remembering who had given them to her and the moments they represent. The silence around her feels thick as if it presses against her ears. She sighs and closes her eyes, letting memories wash over her, both comforting and painful. She feels the absence of loved ones and the loss of traditions that once brought joy. The night deepens and the widow moves to the kitchen again, thinking of a meal. She opens the cupboards once more and sighs at the emptiness. Her stomach grumbles, but she cannot bring herself to cook something small that will feel meaningless. The cold wind slips in around the edges of window and the house feels even lonelier. She sits at the table looking at the empty plates and imagines the laughter and conversation that could have been. She reaches for a cup of tea and holds it in her hands, letting warmth seep slowly into her fingers and hoping somehow that this night might pass gently, though the emptiness remains heavy and familiar around her heart. The quiet of the widow's house is broken by a soft knock at the door. She startles and hesitates, unsure who could be visiting at this hour. She wraps her shawl tighter around her shoulders and moves slowly toward the sound. Her heart races with a mix of hope and fear as she opens the door to see a neighbor standing there holding a basket filled with food and small gifts. The neighbor smiles warmly and speaks gently, offering the basket and insisting that she come inside. For a moment the widow hesitates, at first accustomed to handling everything alone and unsure of accepting help from anyone. The neighbor does not pressure her. Instead they speak softly, sharing kind words and friendly conversation that eases the tension in her chest. The widow glances at the basket and sees bread and fresh fruit and a few simple ingredients that could become a modest meal. She feels a flicker of surprise and gratitude but is unsure how to respond. She remembers the loneliness she has carried through so many holidays and the thought that someone thought of her sparks a fragile hope. Slowly the widow steps aside and allows the neighbor into her home. They place the basket on the table and the neighbor begins to unpack the contents, arranging them carefully and speaking with warmth and encouragement. The widow watches quietly, her heart slowly opening as the presence of another person fills the house with energy and light that had been absent for so long. The neighbor tells small stories and jokes lightly, making the widow smile despite herself. The act of bringing food is simple yet powerful, and the widow feels an unfamiliar sense of connection beginning to grow. She notices the gentle way the neighbor moves through her kitchen and the respect in their eyes, and realizes that this gesture is not just about the food but about caring and companionship. She allows herself to speak a few words to thank the neighbor and feels the awkwardness of long isolation mingling with the comfort of human kindness. As they work together to organize the ingredients and prepare for a small Christmas meal, the widow begins to feel a sense of hope that had not been present earlier in the evening. She watches her baby granddaughter of memories of past Christmases fade as the warmth of the present fills the room. She begins to imagine that this night could hold joy and not just sorrow, and that the neighbor's presence might change the pattern of solitude that has dominated her life for so long. By the time the fire crackles gently in the hearth and the shadows stretch softly across the room, the widow feels a small but tangible shift in her heart. The neighbor's kindness has begun to chip away at the walls she built around herself, and she begins to believe that perhaps she is not completely alone after all. The simple gesture of a basket of food has planted the seed of hope and a sense that this Christmas might be different, and that maybe a new bond of friendship or family could begin tonight. The kitchen fills with warmth and the smell of cooking as the widow and her neighbor begin preparing the simple Christmas meal together. The widow moves slowly, at first hesitant to let someone else take part in her life. After so many lonely years, she watches the neighbor chop vegetables and stir sauces with care and gradually allows herself to join in sharing small tasks and stories. Her hands tremble slightly as she cracks eggs and kneads dough, but the neighbor's gentle encouragement makes her feel capable and included. As they work side by side, the widow begins to speak of past Christmases, recalling the laughter and chaos of family gatherings and the quiet moments that held meaning. She tells stories of traditions long forgotten, and the neighbor listens attentively, asking questions and laughing softly at the funny moments. The baby of memories, the empty house and the silence that had seemed so heavy now seem lighter in the presence of shared activity and gentle companionship. The neighbor's presence brings a rhythm and a sense of order to the evening that the widow has not felt in years. The chopping of vegetables, the stirring of pots and the arranging of plates becomes a comforting dance, and the widow feels a connection to life and to the season that she thought had passed her by. She begins to smile more freely and even laughs quietly at small mishaps in the kitchen, enjoying the sound as if it has returned after a long absence. The widow notices the small gestures the neighbor makes, the way they adjust a chair to make her more comfortable, the careful way they season the food and the patient way they wait when she hesitates. She begins to trust the intentions behind these actions and finds herself opening up in ways she had not imagined possible. The room seems brighter and warmer, and the small Christmas tree in the corner twinkles as if acknowledging the shift that is happening. By the time the meal is ready, the widow feels a deep sense of gratitude and relief. She watches as the neighbor sets the table with care, placing each item thoughtfully, and realizes that this simple act has transformed her home and her evening. The food itself is modest, but the experience of preparing it together makes it feel abundant and rich. The widow sits down for the first time in many years, feeling not only hunger for food but a hunger for connection being satisfied. As they share the meal, the widow feels a new sense of belonging slowly taking root. She listens to the neighbor's stories and shares her own, and the house feels alive again with conversation and laughter. The weight of solitude seems to lift, and the widow allows herself to feel that perhaps she can experience joy even after loss. The evening stretches on with warmth and comfort, and the widow realizes that the act of sharing a meal has become something far greater than she ever expected. It has become a bridge to hope and a reminder that human connection can restore even the loneliest of hearts. The evening continues, but the widow's thoughts drift back to grief and loss that have shadowed her life for so long. The laughter and warmth in the kitchen cannot erase memories of past Christmases spent alone or the empty seats around her table. She feels a pang sadness as certain memories rise unbidden, and the familiar ache of loss presses against her heart. The neighbor notices her quiet moments and gently asks if she wants to talk about the past, and the widow hesitates but then begins to speak softly of those she has loved and lost. As she talks, tears slip down her cheeks, and neighbor listens without interruption, offering only kind words and occasional reassurance. The widow feels a mixture of relief and vulnerability as she confronts memories that have lain buried for years. She speaks of hopes and disappointments, regrets and small joys, the things that make up a life lived fully even amid sorrow. The neighbor's presence allows her to express what she has kept hidden, and slowly the heaviness begins to lift. They continue preparing small details for the meal together. Widow notices how the simple tasks now feel soothing rather than burdensome. The act of cooking and setting the table becomes almost meditative, and shared activity strengthens sense of connection between them. The widow begins to see that grief does not have to be carried alone, and that the act of sharing her feelings and her time can transform the weight into something lighter. As the meal comes together, the widow feels a shift in her heart. She recognizes that while her loved ones are gone, their memory does not have to be a source of only pain. It can inspire kindness and warmth and remind her value of connection. The neighbor quietly comments on the beauty of the simple meal, and the widow realizes that she has created something meaningful not just in the food but in the act of opening her heart. By the time they sit down to eat, the widow's sadness is tempered with a gentle sense of hope. She finds comfort in the neighbor's companionship and recognizes that she is not alone in facing life's challenges. She allows herself to enjoy the meal, feeling the nourishment of both food and friendship. The night deepens, and the widow notices the quiet strength she has discovered within herself. She understands that grief will always be a part of her, but that hope and connection can coexist with it. The neighbor's kindness has shown her even after great loss there is room for joy, and that a simple gesture of care can open the door to healing and the possibility of family beyond blood. As the candles flicker and the meal concludes, the widow feels a sense of peace and gratitude. She looks at neighbor and realizes that this night has marked a turning point not just in her Christmas but in her life. She has begun to reclaim the warmth and belonging she thought she had lost, and memory of this evening will remain a reminder that hope can emerge in the quietest of moments and transform even the loneliest hearts. The night winds down and the widow feels a warmth she has not experienced in years. She sits at the table with the neighbor beside her, and her home now filled with light and laughter. The modest meal they prepared together has become more than food. It has become a symbol of care and connection. She notices the simple joy in sharing stories and smiles and feels a sense of belonging that had long been absent from her life. As they clear the dishes and tidy the kitchen, the widow reflects on the transformation of the evening. She realizes that the neighbor's kindness has not only filled her house with warmth but has begun to fill the emptiness in her heart. She sees that family is not only those born of blood but those who choose to share their time and care, and that connection can blossom even unexpectedly. The widow finds herself laughing more freely and sharing memories and small hopes for the future. The neighbor listens with patience and interest, and the rhythm of their conversation feels natural and comforting. The simple presence of someone willing to care without expectation becomes a profound gift, and she begins to imagine that she might continue to nurture this bond beyond a single night. Outside, the snow begins to fall lightly and the widow steps to the window to watch the quiet scene. The glow from her house spills onto the porch and contrasts with the dark night, creating a feeling of warmth and safety. She realizes that this moment marks a turning point and that the holiday no longer feels like a reminder of loneliness but of renewal and hope. As they sit together by candlelight, the widow feels a deep sense of gratitude for the neighbor's quiet generosity. She recognizes that the night has given her something far more lasting than a meal. It has given her companionship, trust, and the knowledge that even after loss it is possible to open one's heart and find a new family in unexpected places. The evening concludes with laughter and gentle conversation, and the widow feels a lightness that had been absent for many years. She understands that Christmas is no longer only about memories of the past but about the potential for joy and connection in the present and future. The neighbor has become more than a friend. They have become a part of her life, a chosen family member who brings hope and belonging. As the candles burn low and the snow continues to fall, she feels a sense of peace and anticipation for the days to come. The empty table of past years has been transformed into a full heart and a home filled with warmth. She realizes that even in solitude there is room for kindness to enter and for new bonds to grow, and that this Christmas has created a tradition of hope, love, and shared life that will endure far beyond a single night.